This giant gavel outside the Ohio Supreme Court building here in Columbus is symbolic of the fact that decisions made by the 7 justices who make up the court carry a large weight and impact every resident of the Buckeye State. Now, 3 of those 7 seats are up for election this fall. In one of those races, incumbent Republican Robert Cupp is being challenged by Democrat William ONeill. ONeill currently works as a registered nurse in the pediatric unit of a Cleveland area hospital. He's a former assistant Ohio attorney general who also served 10 years on Ohio's 11th District Court of Appeals.
Many people feel that justice is for sale in Ohio due to the influence of campaign contributions to Supreme Court justices. How can you assure all Ohioans that your decisions will be fair and unbiased in light of the fact that you're receiving campaign contributions from interest groups that expect you to vote their way?
That's a great question, and it's at the heart of the elections in Ohio this year for Supreme Court. I'm Judge ONeill, and I think I'm known throughout the state as the one that says, no money from nobody. I don't believe that money and judges mix. They never have. That's why I do not take contributions. A great example of that is we have 2 justices on the Ohio Supreme Court this year that heard oral arguments on a case on January 15th. They took a $6,300 contribution from a party to the litigation on January 30th, and they ruled in that party's favor 2 weeks later. It is wrong for judges to take money. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those justices. I think they're honorable people, but it is impossible to avoid the appearance of impropriety if you take money from a litigant who's actively litigating a case before your court. So it's a problem. It's one we have to address. Money and judges don't mix. That's what I'm running on.
Ohio currently elects its judges, but many people feel they should be appointed by the governor or a nonpartisan committee. What do you feel is better for the community and why?
Well, I like your question because it really gets to the heart of the question. I think you have to look at what judges do for a living. We decide who goes to jail and who stays out. We decide what happens to your belongings after you die. We decide whether or not you can raise your children while you're still alive. The decisions we make are so important, I simply cannot believe that the voters of Ohio would be well served by an appointed system. You know, after all, an appointed system is just going into a different level of politics because somebody has to make the decision. I think the voters they've been asked this question many times. They've been overwhelmingly in support of electing our judges. I support that. I don't like the way we do it right now. I think we have to take the money out of the political process. I think that the public funding of the races, particularly at the Supreme Court level, is a good idea. It is wrong. It is wrong for a judge to raise $1 million to get a job on the Ohio Supreme Court. But that's the way we do it right now. We can do better, but I'm 100% in support of maintaining the people's right to make this important decision.
As a Supreme Court justice, what would you do to ensure that people in poverty, people that are underrepresented, or people that are otherwise disenfranchised have equal access to our justice system?
That's a great question, and it's a problem in society. The local bar associations try to encourage people to do pro bono work, you know, a lawyer working for free. I think we really, as a Supreme Court, need to be looking at that as a requirement. Right now, we require lawyers to continue their continuing legal education, which is a good thing and it's a good idea. I'm not sure we shouldn't at least visit the idea of if you have the privilege of being a lawyer in our society, don't you also have an obligation to give back to society as a condition of maintaining that license? So I would like to hear more from the bar associations and more from the citizenry. Isn't it time that we see that we have a level playing field for everybody before the courts?
When it comes to sentencing, which do you prefer, judicial discretion or minimum mandatory sentencing?
You know, when I was on the Court of Appeals for 10 years, we saw this trend sweeping across Ohio where I believe the Ohio General Assembly would really like to replace all judges with a computer so that if you do X crime, you get Y in the sentence. that is so fundamentally unfair and probably unconstitutional, because the problem is every case is different, every defendant is different, every fact pattern is different. There's got to be a reason to elect judges, and I think you're electing them because of their wisdom, and you can never permit a judge's hands to be tied by minimum sentences as we've done in Ohio. I'm absolutely opposed to it, but it is the law, unfortunately.
There's been a lot of discussion lately about judges legislating from the bench, effectively rewriting the laws that the legislature has previously written. How do you feel about that issue?
Well, I think it's an important issue because the Constitution of Ohio says there's 3 separate independent branches of government. The judiciary reviews legislation. We do not write legislation. So it's unfortunate whenever that charge is made, and I think it's our duty as judges and justices to see to it that we don't do it. Many times as a Court of Appeals judge, I would have to rule on a matter in a way that I don't necessarily agree with the law, but if it is the law, that's what's to be upheld.
We still have a foreclosure crisis in Ohio. It's been 5 years since the Supreme Court took the initiative to encourage attorneys across the state to represent homeowners in foreclosure cases and also to set up mediation programs in the counties. What will you do to review how that process has worked and to strengthen it going forward?
Well, let's be very honest here. The foreclosure crisis in Ohio has got 2 parts. We've got irresponsible homeowners, but we have irresponsible banks as well. And caught in the middle of this is people who are just trying to do the right thing. I believe that we have to look at the billions of dollars of excess profits that were made by the lenders preceding the foreclosure crisis and see if we can't find a way to both expedite the process through mediation or other alternative methods, but also to see to it that people who can't afford to defend their right decisions are heard in court in a timely fashion. Let's not forget that the home is the castle in Ohio. It is a crisis. It's one that we all have to look at to make sure that profits haven't been put in front of justice.
During the campaign, voters will be asking you a lot of questions about specific issues. How will you answer these questions so that voters will have the information they need when they go to vote without violating the Judicial Ethics Code?
Great question, Tori, and it's one that I eagerly answer. The United States Supreme Court has said that we have not only the right, but the obligation to address issues as candidates. Justice Scalia wrote the opinion, and he said there's no reason to have elections and prohibit the people running from office from talking about issues. So I freely talk about issues. Naturally, I draw the line, and I would never comment on a case that's pending before a court. But on broad issues, I think judges have an obligation to let the voters know where they stand.
If you're elected as justice, will you make your decisions based on your political affiliation or what you feel is best for the people of Ohio?
Thanks, Connor, and I think to ask your question is to answer it. You know, there's many times that you come across an uncomfortable case as a judge. I've decided over 3,000 cases as a Court of Appeals judge. I would defy anyone to find any political bias in any of those 3,000 opinions. It is a solemn oath that we take when we become judges because of the importance of what we're doing, that you got to put your personal preferences, your political affiliations aside and decide cases on the law, because that's what people expect and that's what they're entitled to.
There seems to be a philosophical difference of viewpoint on the court about the punishment of juvenile offenders. In your opinion, should juveniles be treated differently from adults in all cases? Do you believe there are some punishments that are just too harsh for juvenile offenders?
Judge, that's a great question. I spent a lot of time as a guardian ad litem up in Ashtabula County representing juvenile offenders and juvenile abused kids. I think we have to look back at the history of juvenile court. 100 years ago, we established juvenile courts because the primary objective was to see to it that the youth of the offender is taken into account in the sentencing. Way too many times I think that gets lost. I think juveniles are different. Juveniles make mistakes, and I understand there are terrible crimes that are committed by juveniles, but I just can't believe that society is best served if you take a 16-year-old, you treat him as an adult, and you put him away for life. I think we can do better.
The office of the Ohio Supreme Court is a highly influential position. I'd like to know 3 things about justices who are running for the Supreme Court. Number 1, what has been your greatest accomplishment in administering justice? Number 2, what has been your opponent's greatest accomplishment in administering justice? And number 3, what has been the Ohio Supreme Court's greatest accomplishment in administering justice?
Great question, and I like talking about it, actually. Let's start with me. As a lawyer, I think I'm the only candidate for the Supreme Court of Ohio who can say I have represented a black teenager wrongfully accused of a crime, marched him out of the courthouse as a free man. As a presiding judge on the Court of Appeals in Warren, I ruled on an adoption case which was multi-state, and the future of a child was at stake, and we had a rule in our court that you drop everything you're doing and expedite that matter and get it out quickly and get it out right. That case ended up as the adoption law of Ohio. It was adopted as by the Supreme Court. My opinion was adopted as the law. It was a proud moment as a judge. As to my opponent, I don't get many opportunities to talk about him, so I don't really know about his accomplishments that much. I know that he's a genuinely good guy with a lot of common sense, and I think that's a valuable addition to the Supreme Court of Ohio. As to the Supreme Court of Ohio, I think the best accomplishment that comes to my mind for them is the transition into the electronic information age. Today, on a laptop, you can bring up the site of the Supreme Court and you can look at the law all the way back to the 1800s in the case law as recently as 2 or 3 days ago. I think it is really good what the Supreme Court has done in bringing transparency and openness to the court, because I think that's important. If we're asking people to trust the Supreme Court, they have an absolute right to know what's happening there. Well, good afternoon. My name is Judge William ONeill. As many of you know, I'm a retired judge from the 11th District Court of Appeals, where I served 2 terms as the presiding judge. I decided over 3,000 cases, from everything from adoption to zoning and everything in between. I'm also a retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army, and was awarded the Bronze Star for my service in Vietnam. But more importantly, I am the father of Sean Patrick ONeill, who's loadmaster on a C-130, and he's home safe and sound from Iraq. So I'm not only a retired military veteran, but I'm a proud papa of a warrior of our times. I've done a lot as a lawyer. I've represented a black teenager wrongfully accused of a crime, marched him out of the courthouse as a free man. I've stood beside a widow who demands compensation for the asbestos death of her husband. I've done that from the trial court through the Supreme Court, and that's what makes me somewhat unique as a candidate. I've not only appeared before the Supreme Court on multi-million-dollar cases, but I've sat on the Supreme Court by assignment of the late Chief Justice Tom Moyer. But today, I'm a candidate for the Supreme Court. Last night, I was a pediatric emergency room nurse at the clinic, which is what I do in addition to practicing law since my retirement. But I'm running for the Supreme Court of Ohio because I think there's something fundamentally wrong with the way we elect judges in Ohio. I believe that money and judges do not mix. I think it is fundamentally wrong for a judge to take money and then sit on a case from people who have given him or her money. It's just wrong. So that's why I run my races simply out of my own pocket, which are certainly not deep pockets. But I think that the dignity of the office requires that we run a dignified campaign. Recently, Two justices on the Ohio Supreme Court, both people whom I admire, took a $6,300 contribution from a litigant before the Supreme Court of Ohio right after oral arguments, and then they ruled in favor of that litigant 2 weeks later. That's wrong. The problem is that it undermines the integrity of the court, because the appearance of impropriety is what must be avoided by all judges. As I said, I've done 3,000 cases as a Court of Appeals judge. No one has ever questioned my integrity. No one has ever questioned my bias as a judge. My name is Bill ONeill. I'm running for the Supreme Court of Ohio because I am a parent, a proud parent. I'm a nurse. I'm a former trial lawyer, and I'm an experienced judge. I ask for your vote.
Just remember that before you cast your ballot, make sure you've read up on candidates' positions on both sides of the aisle so you can make an informed decision when you vote. Tom McKee, 9 News at the Ohio Supreme Court in Columbus.